Welcome, everyone. I first want to start out with a recording disclaimer. Please note that this session is being recorded. It may include your likeness and/or your voice. You have the option of muting your camera and/or your microphone, but participation implies authorization for MassBay to use such likeness and voice on this recording in perpetuity. Tonight's program is made possible by a Big Read grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. I'd also like to make a land acknowledgement. Thank you, Judy. Massachusetts Bay Community College wishes to acknowledge that the Wellesley, Framingham, Ashland campuses sit on land that was appropriated by the U.S. federal government from the Nipmuc, Massachusetts, and Pawtucket tribes. MassBay cannot change the past, but what we can do is honor the land, the ancestors, and the indigenous traditions as we at MassBay use this sacred land as a communal place to nurture learners to move forward and make a more inclusive world. So we're fortunate today to have Larry Spotted Crow Mann to be a poet, share his poetry, his inspirations, and perhaps some of his music with us tonight. Larry is a member of the Nipmuc tribe and a resident of Massachusetts. He is an award-winning writer, poet, cultural educator, traditional storyteller, tribal drummer, dancer, and motivational speaker involving youth sobriety, cultural, and environmental awareness. His work has taken him across the United States, Canada, and parts of Europe. Mann is also a board member of the Nipmuc Cultural Preservation Trust, which is an organization set up to promote the cultural, social, and spiritual needs of Nipmuc people, as well as an educational resource of Native American studies. Another very important part of Mann's work has been advocating for drug and alcohol prevention in Native American teens. Certainly an issue for all youth, but by far, Native American teens have one of the highest rates of drug and alcohol problems, which has led to a staggering level of teen suicide. Mann, along with other Native American leaders, worked in collaboration with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health to create 2 booklets as a resource for prevention of drug and alcohol abuse. Mann's first book, Tales from the Whispering Basket, a collection of short stories and poetry, has been internationally acclaimed. His groundbreaking novel, The Morning Road to Thanksgiving, is the 2015 Native American Wordcraft Circle of Honors winner, Best Young Adult Novel of the Year. And Larry's latest book, Drumming and Dreaming, skillfully brings forth the oral tradition in a brilliantly woven collection of legends that beckon the spirit of the land and the ancient voices that still have so much to teach us all. Some of the stories in Drumming and Dreaming will be featured in a statewide curriculum across Massachusetts as part of a life skills training for teachers and resident teachers and students for alcohol prevention in American teens. Larry is the resident artist at Bunker Hill Community College and is a recent, he just was won this, Mann is won the 2021 Indigenous Peoples Award by the NAACP. So please welcome Larry Spotted Crow Mann.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Tim.
You're welcome. Thank you.
With
I'm going to make you the presenter now.
Okay.
You have the power.
All right. Don't tell me that. So first thing I want to do, everybody, if you would care to join me, just take a deep breath and it's been quite a time. I want to acknowledge that the last couple of years with the pandemic and all the vicissitudes that all of us have gone through in one form or another, the loss of our relatives and the pain, the quarantines, the financial hardships. And so it's, I'm really grateful. I speak from a place of gratitude. I recently had COVID myself 3 weeks ago. I'm vaccinated, boosted, all that fun stuff, and wicked paranoid about it, and I got it anyway. It was a very scary time. Gratefully, I did do that, so I'm pretty okay now. So I really uh, speak from gratitude and thankful to be here. Um, it's despite the lockdown, it's been quite a busy time for me. We really made these changes. We made some good adjustments at my cultural center. Also, that's not I have two websites, and my bio is not completely updated on that. I'm also really proud to mention that I'm the director and co-founder of the Okiteo Cultural Center, which I'm definitely going to talk a little bit more about that. Out in Western Mass, we are the first run and operated Indigenous Cultural Center ever to be in existence in that space. So we're really excited about the work we're doing, the uplifting, the education, the cultural, the Living Present series. Matter of fact, since I'm on there, I'm not going to pivot too much away. So I'm going to put the website of Okiteo right in the, let's see, right in the chat box there, because I really want to. After being an artist for, let's see, how do I, here we go over here. It's a different place than Zoom. Uh, Being an artist for over 3 decades, one of the most important things I can do, as was mentioned in my work, is to pass it on. And through Okite, we're able to do that. So feel free to look to that website. We have so many wonderful things going on, and the most crucial part about that is that we asked our community to get invested in this work that we're doing. For those who don't know, if you do the research, Black and Brown arts and culture organizations mostly get their support from government grants and federal programs and so on. And so when that money dries up, many of these institutions have to shut down. Whereas white run museums and organizations and centers get about 75% of their funding from individuals, whereas Black and Brown get about 6%. So it's a wide gap that we're really talking in terms of getting people to understand the importance, much like the land acknowledgement. When you hear a land acknowledgement, this is actually an action step to support places like this who are doing the work for their people, by their people. And so I really want to talk about that, the Okiteo Cultural Center. Um, so with that, again, I know we have some poetry to get to. I love reading poetry, um, but I also want to also do a proper introduction, which is it needs to be in my tribal language, and I speak to you today from traditional homelands of my ancestors here in Central Mass, a place called Webster, or if you're from here, you say Webster. A very sacred and special place to us. And in the language of this land, I must share the language that is still resonates with the trees, with the water, with the sky, and it best associates my spirit. And so we say, Wun nashana tumamanatu, tabatni, watu chikinnisin, okumis, tabatni wuchi sapalsu, wasukatiga huana, notas nirwamanantiok, king nuta yi upentaminok, and the male nirwame quantam kichia, ka mata wanantan ka nagutie kokutan ninua manatu usakatie huna womanetio ka nosokomuso amoke ninoho kankanto chokesachek ka musk tabani manatu ni wachia yun. I greet you in the words of my Algonquin language, the words of peace and reciprocity. And the best translation I can make for those words is I ask that our ancestors would come and share this space. I ask that we would enter this time in a good way, that we would listen with our hearts and have that understanding going forward, and that we would share our breath in a good way. And so in English, it sounds funny sharing our breath. So in our language, when we say breath, um, it signifies our spirit. As we know, I'm talking right now. Without the breath, I can't talk. It's my life force. So when we say breath, we mean the life force. And so when we're speaking, it has a profound meaning. And maybe sometimes we forget that. And that kind of helps us understand poetry. Profound, because I'm breathing to say this. It's my life that's coming out. I'm sharing life and words simultaneously. And so when we say we share our breath, we're sharing our spirit. And so that is why it's always important when we talk about what we say, you know. Uh, And I also talked about our ancestors would come and share this space with us in a good way. And although we come from different spaces, that they would come and have this recollection in this moment of peace and harmony that we could share together. Um, and also I introduced my name, Kankanto Chokesiche, in my language, which means the crow who has spots, or in English, it's translated as spotted crow. So that's that. And also I like to share here what we have so adequately called the drum, the heartbeat. And one of the things that I always like to share, um, native teachings, and sometimes they can feel pretty romanticized or lofty or really far out stuff, right? And I tell people, our teachings are the closest things you could think of in terms of science, because we have this expression called all my relations. And in science, they call it quantum physics. And also, when we say the heartbeat, we are talking about entering into spaces where we look beyond the surface of things. For example, every living thing has a heartbeat, not just the two-legged humans, but also the grass and, of course, mammals and all the different creatures that we see, water, the clouds, air, it's vibrating. So what is a heartbeat, right? It's something that has a rhythmic moving to sustain something, to sustain other things. So water has that, blade of grass has that, the air has it, right? All in different forms. But just bringing it back to our two-leggeds, we're taught that because we get into a lot of trouble. We look at the external, right? Somebody's different color skin, right? They speak a different language, their hair is different, they might not have no hair, right? And we start making judgments based on this external. But we're taught everybody on the inside is doing this. And this is where we're supposed to be looking, right? So the next time you have those problems, if that's going to be an issue for someone, just remember you're talking to another heartbeat, just like you, same, doing the same thing. I want to share this song to Nippon Healing song. I think is appropriate for all the different things here. Mitske hueyo, mina wan, uche sikaniam, ga eyuteyo, pa yuteyo, akwani etenawan, mina wanti antam, Nina wanti anthem. Hey yo, hey yo, hey ya. Hey yo, hey yo, hey ya. Hey ha, hey ha, hey ha. Ya ra 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 ra. Menado, Nitske hueyo, Ninawan, Uchesikania, Ka eyuteyo, Ka yuteyo, Akwani etenawan, Nina one P and them. Nina one P and them. Hey yo, hey yo, hey ha. Hey yo, hey yo, hey ha. Hey ha. Hey ha. Hey ha. Yeah, the bottomish. Put the bottomish. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I love to sing, and I love ginger tea. It's one of my favorites, but I always forget that ginger makes you burp. So you're trying to sing and you're, oh. Oh, it was fun. But now I can drink it safely. Okay, here you go. Um, so for those who don't know, Nipmuc means people of the water, people of the fresh water. And water, you might have heard the maxim, water is life, and it truly is, especially for our community. I love being in water. I'm a surfer. I I'm fat. Actually, I was working on a poem about that, and I've had several other prose style of contemplations about water. But I was really getting into something deep, but I got sick and just kind of like didn't want to move it. But hopefully next time we're doing this, I'll have that poem ready to share. So I'm really excited about that. Um, and so we are Nipmuc people, the community we're about, there's about 4,000 of us, Nipmuc people still here today. And I'm going to shift into the poetry in a second, but one of the most important things to say is when we think about Native people in terms of history, and this includes some of my work at Bunker Hill Community College, where we're doing some really revolutionary work by shifting the curriculum, not just the course, but across the board from humanities to genetics to science to, of course, history and art, to have an indigenous component that reflects the land. And so when you think about indigenous epistemology, say physics, and I mentioned earlier, like all my relations, quantum physics, how the linear idea of understanding is a different concept in terms of indigenous understanding. And talk about biology, our forms of growing food, polyculture, right? The three sisters, you have corn, beans, and squash, and it does an exciting thing for the ground. You don't need pesticides, and it does these amazing things as opposed to the Monsanto monoculture, right? And we all know walking around like neon signs, eating that monoculture stuff. So Bunker Hill is really taking huge steps in terms of initiating a new way of looking at indigenous epistemology. So that's really cool. And the term that I like to use now is the living presence. So uh, it's easy to talk about history, right? But there's a living presence of people that are still here. Um, and so with that, I love to talk about this stuff so much. And as an educator myself, I have to kind of curb myself. So, and I know we have limited time. So poetry, yes. Um, I have several I plan on reading here, but I think I need to, and I think it goes into Tim's, one of the questions about the inspiration behind it. And I think it's important to set that platform about how we got to that, because poetry is such an intimate thing, if I can call it a thing, because nobody really knows what it is. And when we talk about Greek and and Greek style of poetry with the meters and the stanzas and all that, and indigenous poetry is much different than that. It's a fractal. It's nonlinear. It can do different things. It can change tenses, right? Past, present, future. And I think it's the way poetry was meant to be. You're seeing a lot of that now uh, in terms of following the so-called rules. And so, um, and I'll just speak for myself, what inspired me and how I became a poet, and also an activist, a fighter for social justice, somebody who's advocates against addiction. I was a product of that myself. Um, Many indigenous people, I would say everyone that's alive is a product of trauma. Um, and I myself come from three generations of a boarding school. I have three prior generations. My grandfather's oldest brother was the last child to be taken. If you don't know anything about boarding schools, please look them up. There's gut-wrenching stories about what our people went through there. I have two aunts and uncles who did not survive that experience. And we talk about generational trauma and the different vicissitudes that our communities continue to go through, much like was mentioned in the opening, in terms of our health disparities, drug and alcohol addictions, and different things like that. So taking that as a whole, and I grew up in the 70s and 80s, I'm 54 now. It was a very, and I always say in some of my talks, my childhood was probably one of the worst experiences of my life growing up in Massachusetts as a Native person. The abuse was horrendous. I'm talking from the school system, let alone the society where there was still segregation, there was still busing. It was really a lot of black and white issues, right? Nobody was talking about Indians other than the John Wayne movies. We were a caricature of our own existence, and so I say all that to help folks understand, and I can only share it from my perspective. It's like why I do what I do, and it was a matter of survival. I think my poetry, it was a cathartic release of pain, of injustice, of being heard. Um, I heard something once said about some of these freedom fighters down in South America, um, and if you looked at some of those videos there, there was a lot of bloodshed down there. Anybody knows some of the history, the Sandinistas and all that, and they would wear these masks, right? These red cloths over their face, and a lot of people thought that they were doing it because they won't hide their faces to be seen. Because when you see someone with a red mask and that's it stands out. But just another brown face, right? You're not going to notice that. So that's what they were doing. And I think poetry does that in a lot of different ways because it's not normal. It's not regular talk. It's does all kinds of things. It goes in different directions. It says all kinds of things. Um, and it speaks to power. It speaks to love, hate, right? Trauma. Um, and so with that, I want to, and I have, and through the years, I've experienced with many different types of poetry, depending on the mood or life, the way my life was at the time. And so I wanted to really help folks understand the place that my poetry had come from, and we could talk a little bit more about the process. So I'm going to share this first style. This is a YouTube video I'm going to share of my first poem I'm going to share here. I think this is a good place to start. Um, and this poem is called "Get Over It." And to set this up a little bit, I don't usually. This is not my usual style. This is like the slam poet style. I think this is more of a newer, but I needed to do this poem. I did this, wrote this a few years ago. It's a 6-minute poem, and I'm usually a person who reads them. I don't memorize them. Uh, I memorize them in here, but I have to always go back and look. But this poem, I needed to memorize it, so I worked it like it was a script in my heart, and I etched it in my mind. I says, I'm not gonna, I can't read this one. This is too deep. This needs to flow, nonstop, no looking down, just straight out from my breath. And so that's what this poem does here. And this is entitled "Get Over It." And I want to share it and make sure I do it right where we get the sound and that, that, that. Okay. Everybody see that? Okay. All right. So let's see. That's all the way up. Get over it. Get over it. I have heard that so many times when I want to grieve over the genocide, slavery, and tyranny that lasted over 300 years. Now you want to oppress my tears. You want to bury my wounded voice when it wants to scream until it heals. Cathartic release from all those dirty land deals. You have no idea how it feels to have your pain subjugated and oppressed while waiting for the redress. But instead you put on that fake Indian headdress and tell me about some Cherokee princess. I want to free a million sad souls and allow them to rise up before the world like an impenetrable dark clouds of light and release like morning rain where they were meant to rain. What is the time limit to mourn those for Deer Island, Great Swamp, Mystic Fort, Turner's Falls, Klamath River, Loopton, Washita, Pitt River, Conestoga, Sand Creek, Bosque Redondo, Wounded Knee, Trail of Tears, oh what those Paxton boys did, and the millions of other places that never made it into his story. The sanctioned abuse and torture of children ripped away from their homes for a militarized Christian education where they were raped, beaten, tortured, some even put in electric chairs as a form of punishment. You want me to get over those days that they were never allowed to laugh, love, smile, or just be a kid?
where the atrocities and mass graves continue to be uncovered, buried beneath the shopping malls, amusement parks, and schools of higher indoctrination. No, not getting over it. Not getting over it helps me to remember the future. How can I get over the gift of dream, or how Crow brought the corn, the sacrifice of deer, sacred wampum, medicine of the bear, salmon, wisdom of the turtle, or the blessings of the eagle? No, they are not to get over, but inside the teachings that reflect my mother and my purpose. Why can't you get over the Gettysburg Address, Battle of Bunker Hill, Independence Day, or Columbus? Really? Or why do you have to remember the Alamo or reenact the Civil War? Yes, I understand. They are your fond recollections of past conquests and political agreements. We suffered because of your fond recollections of past conquests and political agreements. The world suffers because of your fond recollections of past conquests and political agreements. But yes, we got over it. We got over the books that didn't teach true history. We got over the narrative that leaves out our beauty and contributions to the world. We got over the cartoon images and mascots and said, no, you want me not to remember. Make my mind vacant like a nameless graveyard where weeds can flourish which you can harvest. You want me to melt away in your melting pot, alchemy of my flesh, smoldering into shades of forgetfulness and denial where I can never shine. You want me to get over the last piece of me that bonds me to them, that broke free from you and the manifestations of your destiny. Oh, so many lives forced into silence. It's going to take some time to get over it. So I'll fight for my right to mourn, honor the dead, and be who I am. The hour of the master has come to pass. I have to be seen because they were forced to hide. Grow my hair long when theirs was despised. Sing a death song to the earth when their right to pray was denied. I have to speak Algonquin, Niwachia Yib Nohog Ninawak, when they were forced to speak biblical lies. My grandparents, uncles and aunts, fishermen, farmers, basket makers, warriors and keepers of this land. They always knew water is life, but had theirs evaporated in those dry, vapid, and stolen fields, forced to sow someone else's dream. Working those usurped lands into their hands where blood sore. Nellie Vickers' kids hauled off to boarding school while her husband is fighting in the Civil War. That's right, Red Man, die for this new America, but we will kill your traditional lore. Then they stole her land, chopped it up, sold it to the white poor. Depression, alcoholism, suicide, they couldn't take it anymore. And you wonder why our youth is shouting, what the fuck was I born for? Because you see, we were left with the nightmares. You fear the dark. Get over it? Get over it. Well, you've been getting over it. Destroying at an obscene pace. And no, I'm not talking about the color of your skin. It's how you relate to this sacred space. You think I like talking about race? Judging by color is a shitty disgrace. But just the other day, a woman asked me if I was born in the United States. I did my best to answer her with a straight face. I told her you won't find a born on their expiration date, because my blood flows under this tectonic plate. The shell of Turtle Island's always been my place. But I get so tired of hearing about it, I drop to my knees and hold my head. So much hate in this world, it makes my mind spin. And I just shout into the universe and say, oh gosh, when will this shit end? But we rise. We rise like that cranberry dawn. Yeah, and the sound of this drum makes me feel strong. And in my heart, I know it won't be long. So it's tobacco down, prayers up. The most powerful empire in the world couldn't shut this drum up. They should know by now, we'd never give up.
Thank you for that.
It is very powerful, Larry.
Am I still sharing the screen? Right, good. Okay, I'm hearing that. Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. That was a poem I needed to share, and everything I shared in there was a reflection of my family. And um, I recently became a playwright, and I wrote a play entitled "Freedom in Season." A really moving experience to write and be part of the direction of that, and create an original score for the work. And that was in conjunction with the Double H Theater out in Western Mass. And the play is based on my great great grandfather, who was a Civil War soldier, and while he was there, Native Americans were not citizens of the country in 1862 and 3. That wouldn't come to 1924, but yet and still, they served at a large portional rate in the military during that time. All in all, I had 36 close relatives serve in the Civil War during that time. Two grandfathers, father and son, there at the same time. And what was so striking about that, these men not only were not citizens, but while they were fighting, one of my granddads, he died there, and as many others there, they had their last of their tribal lands usurped and their children taken from them at the same time. So this is what the things they got. And so my play I wrote revolves around the story of the taking of lands and children. And we're seeing this today. If you're a Native person, the gut wrenching stories of these bodies turning up behind these schools is nothing new for us. And we're so grateful this is coming to light. And this play really kind of goes into that and exposes that. And so I'm really excited about that work. And the poem was kind of a reflection of that. And um, I myself am a first generation city person, as I mentioned, growing up in Springfield. And prior to that, my mom and all the rest were tobacco growers, farmers, and so to try to navigate that urban life, it was really tough for us. And so that poem kind of talks about that. So I want to shift now and read one of my favorite poems from my book, Tales from the Whispering Basket. Unless anybody has a burning question, I can stop and answer that.
Folks, you can put your questions in the chat and we can read them out.
Okay, before I read this one, I want to shift over here. So we were mentioning the work that we do with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, VSAS, respectively. And so we created a booklet called "Circle Tied to Mother Earth: Stories and Poems." This is an 11-week program, curriculum, life skills program that is geared for middle school children. Now, when we initially did this, it was for Native youth because of the crisis that we're dealing with. But also, we found that this is beneficial for all youth. So this booklet has been distributed throughout the state of Massachusetts, and we're really excited about that. And so I did a lot of work. Some of my stories from drumming and dreaming are in there, because what we find is that our legends are ways to really connect, and they're life teachings about how to deal with conflict resolution, bullying, how to say no in tough situations, right? And so we look to our stories, and we first asked the question. 500 years ago, we didn't have an alcohol problem. We didn't have a heroin problem. Kids weren't killing themselves. So what were they doing? What were they focused on? What was their connection? And that was the connection to the land that was removed from them. Our stories were taken away from us. And so this booklet here kind of does that. It shares stories and also poems. And so I was asked to write a poem for this booklet. And there's a couple poems I have here. But this first one I'm going to read is it's geared towards middle school children. And I have two versions of this poem because I really was excited about writing this poem about moccasins. So this poem I'm going to read here is geared for a middle school child to help them kind of navigate growing up, because we all know it's tough. If you have kids, you know what they go through. It's hard. So I wrote this poem keeping that in mind. It's entitled "Different Moccasins." My moccasins are beautiful, beaded, stitched really fine, but inside the soles are broken, concealed by the design. My moccasins are ugly, torn and quills all tattered, but my dancing is superb. My gratitude is all that matters. If I am judging others, what do I really see? I don't know what's in those moccasins until they're on my own feet. Everyone has their own moccasins to leave behind their tracks. But if we are judging others, then we will miss our own path. Thank you. And I would say that's good for the young and old. um, and so I'm gonna go over to this other moccasin poem. So I love that poem so much, but I wanted to write something that was more of a life experience poem for me. So I'll share this other poem about moccasins. I found an old pair of moccasins. They were the perfect size for my feet, and when I put them on, they shook and started to speak. I had so many questions that I didn't let them talk, but I had a good feeling the real message would be in my walk. They lived their life always touching Mother Earth, so they never forget who gave them birth. Were these moccasins worn by a woodland, smoke, or jingle dress dancer? They look like they've traveled many paths. This journey will reveal the answer. I noticed on them small scars and marks, perhaps sweat from sacred rocks, or maybe Uncle Henry as he carved a cedar box. These mocks could have been Auntie Laura's, sharing all those legends and scary things, inspiring this storyteller. Turn these moccasins into feathers and escape on black wings. Were they on the feet of great Uncle Samson? He was known for his handmade baskets and carved bows. He made a living selling them to white people as he stood by the side of the road. They say he was the kindest man, took all the kids spearfishing every June, and perhaps he left behind these moccasins because alcohol killed him too soon. They could have been Grandma Lucy's, worn as she gathered dandelion roots. She died a month before I was born. At 5, I wore Grandpa's boots. Those snowshoes were too big for me. I fell and hit my eye. Grandpa picked me up and rocked me by my side. The scar is still there, and I'm thankful for that time. And after all that's happening, I think these moccasins are mine. Thank you. Um, so I'm gonna jump over here to one of my other favorites, the Crow poem. Um, and again, this is from my first book, Tales from the Whispering Basket. Um, so this poem is entitled "The Crow in His Own Words," and I was really excited to write this because, again, when you think about indigenous spirituality and understanding, everything we've learned in this Western noesis is really the opposite of what we believe. And, you know, even when you think about crows and, oh, we got to get rid of those horrible things. And as you heard, like in my other poem, the crow is the one who brought the corn. And he's a very significant spiritual being into our people. And so I wanted to share this poem, The Crow in His Own Words. I am the crow, mystical as the moon and dark as the night, traversing through the spirit world on shadow wings of flight. Some have feared my murky hue, even called it a curse, but the dimness of my feathers binds me to the universe. The sun that you seek is beauty we cannot hide. The glowing of my feathers reflects the light inside. I am the product of the dream world, transformed by Creator's gift. Sometimes bird, sometimes man, the ability to shape shift. The things I foresee have powerful distinctions, like earth, fire, and sky, guiding me to my visions. My family ties are eternal and strong, tight as a row of corn, loving and sharing with one another from the moment we are born. My words have been misunderstood, sometimes mistaken for a call. But if you listen with your heart, I am speaking Creator's law. Devadimish. Thank you. I want to share this one here. This was it's kind of a, it's a funny poem. This is going to kind of like shift it, the levity a little bit. And back in college, I remember, and it's very dangerous to get a writer upset, right? and especially a poet, because we really we'll have a lot of fun with you with these words. We just grab and form them into a place where they can really jab you, right? So I was having this real hard time with this professor, so I decided to write a poem about him. So I'm going to share it with you. Okay, this poem is entitled, I haven't looked at this one in a while. It's entitled Professor Profess. It'll be fun reading this one. Professor Profess. You have intellectual prowess, according to the billboard on your wall, but I think it's comparable to other achievements, like something etched on a bathroom stall. Very disturbing for all the students who was here, having their papers wiped and flush and ideas put to the rear. Your grading style is degraded by your lack of nuance, creativity, and practicable application, treating students like single-minded robots or slaves on your personal plantation. Knowledge should be a wondrous path, a journey with many roads, but because of your closed and narrow mind, it becomes a dead-end road with a hefty toll. Learning and teaching encompasses a diverse methodology. However, your rigid lesson plans lacks any epistemology. You should try getting outside yourself so the classroom is not about you. Being forced to suffer through your idiosyncrasies is not the reason we came to school. Sadly, your best skill has been to convince some students that they're insufficient, deducting 10 points here and 10 points there for things nothing to do with their commitment. Your classroom abounds with dedication and originality. Don't be intimidated by cultural plurality. The second we believe we know it all is the second we fail because we put up a wall. You think your methods are faultless, you're grading apocalyptic, but when it comes to your students, you still remain pessimistic. So please don't let the initials MBA, MAD, PhD stop you from thinking, because just like words etched on a bathroom stall, any BS can start stinking. Thank you. So if you look at my book, Whispering Basket, I have quite the selection of poetry. Some doesn't. I get to some really dark places in some of it, and I want to read. So this next poem, I was asking myself, do I want to read this? But I think I will. I'm just going to do this. But I want to give folks heads up. This is a trauma poem, and so I just want to. Everybody's okay with listening to that. This was and if I know there's some poets in here, and as I was preparing for this, I have poems here, and some under the couch, right? We have them all over the place, and so and I found this poem, and I forgot I wrote this, right? And then you look at a poem, you say, did I write that? Where did that come from at that time? And so I wrote this, and it came at a particular time, and so I want to share it again because I don't even know how I did it. And if you ask, so I'm going to share this poem. It's called Dark Born, and I just want to because given all the things, and anyways, I'm going to read it. No more explication. Okay, Dark Born. This room is not made for me. The walls are too cold. Blankets are too small. All the monsters can attack my feet. A speck of faint light sneaks in from the splintered door. The veil of the beast hovers over me. Growling breath demands notice. I am chained to these ripples of fear, frozen motionless. Like death, I pretend I am not real. Did you know the planet Saturn has such beautiful rings and was named after the Greek god Cronus? I fell in love with the stars at age 6, and I often wondered, do they move? How many are there? Even though they are far away, they have made great companions. But their hugs never reach my flesh. I am barred in this space by the clenching teeth, cradled in the plundering claws, saturated by the drooling flame. Spoiled kisses come with the scent of hexane, so I must be a stranger in someone else's abode. I don't belong here, I don't belong anywhere. My body exists in a realm of invalid articulation. My voice has become a hollow stream, drained of emotion, and yet my soul is filled with inverted tears. My heart goes dissolute and scatters like fragments and drifts beyond the shadows. The edge of my eye is like the horizon. It holds the secret of the light and the night. But my center vision fades deep inside, like the jaws of a black hole to swallow the truth. Actually, upon closer examination, Saturn's rings are merely frozen ice and stone, circling in the darkness. Thank you. If anybody has any questions or about process or anything, I don't mind. Actually, yeah, we're getting close to the time, so um, I can answer some questions about poems or writing or what have you.
Yeah, this is Tim. A question that we had discussed yesterday was the structure or the style that you use. You've brought it up. I mean, it seems like my limited knowledge of poetry, more freestyle, free verse. Does that also, is that part of the say for the Nipmuc tribe? What is poetry like among Native American tribes? Is it free verse? Is there a structure to it?
Um,
Historically, traditionally?
so, and that's a really important question because we need to start with language, right? So let's talk about language structure. English is a noun-orientated language. Um, Algonquin, the Nipmuc language, is a verb-orientated language. So it's about action. It's about animation. Everything is living and moving all the time in our language. And so in our language, we don't have a word for art, and we don't have a word for poetry. And that's because, for example, a beautiful basket or a carving, these things are part of daily use. And that would go the same with words. And when I opened up with that prayer, um, and incidentally, if you think about and some folks, some poetry students in here will know this, that, you go back to the Druidic times and Caesar was listening to Druids and poets were the prophets. So you get the poets were considered prophets because they were seers. That's how powerful poetry was in that time. And, unfortunately we lost a lot of that. And so I think it was meant to have that liberty, that freedom. And so in indigenous ways, there's so much we still don't know in terms of our comprehension of cultural relational values. But we do know the things that we do know from our teachings and our inherent knowledge is that these things do have this free flowing style. They do have, if you notice, I do use the rhyming stanzas. I do that sometimes. Um, but also I have the prose style and I have the different variations where it doesn't have to be linear or have this kind of formation that is comprehensible to a kind of a Western style of poem. So, and I think those are very important when you think about like poets like Brings Plenty, and I think Harjo as well. They take that as well. Um, and I got to tell you, I love there's so many native poets that I admire, but there's also poets when I started writing were inspiring to me. Like Sylvia Plath was one of my favorites. I enjoyed her and a few others, and some of Emerson and Thoreau. And he talks about his self living in the woods, but that's what we did. We know the woods, so he gets a lot of credit for that. Something we were already doing. um, so yeah. So I hope I answered that question. That we really and I'll just mention even further as a writer. I ran into some issues with my writing style, the mechanics of it. And I took English and all that, and so I syntax and verb, a predicate, and a noun, all that stuff. But we wanted to have that freedom to write and be in our own voice, and so that I was able to do that and still keep that same voice of our people, and that goes into a lot of the work that we're doing at Bunker Hills is shifting the narrative and not saying this is the only right way. And one of the things I enjoyed about college is, a lot of the courses now we're talking about is that the now I forget the term, experimental knowledge, right? And there are other ways of learning. You know, and we know now, right, just given, you know, the fight we're having over critical race theory, that there's a lot that people need to learn and that the schools didn't do their job because they were designed that way, to teach one narrative. And we have to realize that.
If folks have questions, they can stick it in the chat. So I encourage that. Another question that sort of ties in with what we were talking earlier just now, where I believe Algonquin at least did not have a written language. So to pass on their traditions and so on, was the style, because it is a more action-oriented, verb-oriented language, more prose? Was it somewhat lyrical? And what was that like to help pass on the history?
So I'll have to stop you there because that's another mis misunderstanding, that we didn't have a written language. We actually did, and I'll explain that. First of all, what we have is the mnemonic, mnemonic understanding through the wampum belts. So language and information was passed through the so-called wampum belt. They weren't really a belt; they were beads of information, much like the Mayans had done. Secondly, we had scrolls, and many of these scrolls have been uncovered in the Anishinaabe community, birch bark scrolls, where we use characters much like Mandarin in Chinese symbology. Thirdly, there were many. Uh, um, if you would travel to a certain place, there would be a rock with these inscriptions on it, and also, and so it's very interesting how we use our environment, natural things, to have this form of communication. And some of you may have heard of the trees, the pointing trees that we use. We would bend a tree to teach it to tell where there's water or where there's hunting. And so there are all these different forms of communication through the natural resources, the mnemonic, the belts, and the scrolls, and also something that's not talked about. I'll say a few names: Benjamin Larnell, Waywas, or also known as James the Printer. These were scholars in the 1600s who spoke Greek, Hebrew, Latin, French, English, and Algonquin. They were Nipmuc scholars. Benjamin Larnell, we even created a scholarship around him. He was a 17-year-old poet. He died very young of a disease in the early 1600s. He was the first Harvard student. Many people don't realize Harvard University, it was the first Indian school. The first brick building at Harvard was for Indian children. And my ancestor, James the Printer and Benjamin Larnell, were amongst them, along with some Wampanoag folks. And so early on, indigenous people were already taking on this form of writing that they were adapting to.
That's really interesting.
But having said that, to go back to your point, the oral tradition is paramount. Absolutely, the art of storytelling, and resuscitation is very important. We see a lot of that in the old world. This is nothing new. The recitation of stories, and from what I understand, the Quran itself is a recitation, and so these are kind of the things that were done.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
I have a question.
Well, I'll tell you, I really appreciate you coming to speak with us. Bridget, do you have a
Well,
question?
yeah, I do. I have one question. Just sort of to go along with the
Thank
first
you, Carrie.
question about the differences from Western poetry. You mentioned fractal, and that really stood out to me as opposed to linear. And I just was wondering if you had any example or just could like talk about it a little bit more.
Okay, sure. So what I meant by that is, and that's a great question. Thank you. And okay, it's easy to say in here, and it's sometimes so native spirituality. We'll start there. Um, and I mentioned earlier how we are the first scientists. So indigenous people here, my ancestors, spend a whole lot of time observing, because science, the first method of science is observation. This is why they had such a profound connection to the land, the animals, and they talk about talking trees and water, because we know that through science these things have vibrations, and we communicate with them, and water has a life, and so on. And so what does that mean, right? This this profound connection to all the living things around us. Okay, so now that we have that information, take us as humans. How are we receiving that? Our senses. We have touch, sight, sound, smell, um, and all these different things. Rarely are we using them all at the same time. Okay, so we'll think about that. We have, was it 6 senses or 5? I don't know. We have lots of senses. Some have even more. We have our senses. Um, and now we have, in this modern world, we have communication through words and writing, and music primarily, right? So if I'm talking like I'm right now, you're using your ears. If you look at writing, you're using your eyes and your brain. It's processing the words. Uh, uh, you can look at the word tree, and you don't really know what a tree. Nobody knows what a tree is. We know the word, right? But it's the word tree is not a tree, right? I don't want to get too confused here. So I say all that is because indigenous people thought about these problems, about the senses and how we comprehend. So, like a mountain is fractal, it has these different designs. A tree is fractal. And if you're looking at a tree, say you're standing outside and you're looking at a beautiful waterfall, and next to the waterfall, you can hear that sound, and this beautiful forest, and there's birds going by, and it's just amazing scene. You're not taking it all in. Just like writing, our words go up and down, side to side, right? And so to deal with this problem, our ancestors pray and move in a circle, because this is the only place that we can absorb all the different functions of the universe. This is why we pray in a circle. Sight, sound, smell, hearing, because we're not getting everything. This is why, we talk about, we really don't know anything, and we're missing so much. And I think poetry and our spirit captures that. So this is why when we pray, we do things in a circle. We're trying to resemble everything in the universe that is happening, and connect it back to us. Everything is not linear. Everything is not back. Time. So sometimes it's referred to as deep time. Sometimes it's referred to as a place of no time, void of time. And so we enter into this space of a reality that is encompassing of all. What is the mantle of everything? Um, and so that's what the fractal kind of essentially is representing. And an interesting thing too is that when we talk about, um, have anybody ever heard of, like, when indigenous people talk about 4 directions, the sacred 4 directions? Anybody ever heard that? So we have a format for our prayers. And see, I'm telling you guys some deep stuff here, but it's important to know. Our prayers have a sequence of connecting to all the directions, right? And you make this circular motion, just like the earth is turning, the sun is turning, and we're recognizing the movements of everything. And so we're trying to capture that, all the senses of everything that's happening at once. And so what do those 4 directions really mean? So if I'm facing east, um, I'm connecting with that direction, but I'm really west, I'm really south, I'm really north at the same time. I'm in all those places. So what does that really mean? So what those directions really mean is time, space, matter, and spirit. So if you're looking east and you say that is a place of birth, if you're looking west, that is a place of intellectual curiosity. If you're looking south, that is a place of joy. And looking west, that is a place of the spirit I have. And so it gives you an orientation to life, and where that path that you're on. And so that's why I said it's hard to explain, because it's the comprehension is in the English language is really hard because we haven't created the words to define it in our language, in this English language. But that's what it's really about, making the connection to all the life forces, all the senses that we have, because we don't use them when we're reading. We don't use them when we're smelling something, or so when you're using your spirit, you're naturally doing that. So I hope I answered the question. Thank you. You're muted, Tim, I think.
I'm terrible at that. Well, we've come to the end of the hour, and I just want to thank you so much for a really interesting, entertaining, and mind-provoking presentation. We truly appreciate it, and I also want to thank everyone that's joined us tonight. I appreciate your attendance. In the chat, I have a link to a survey, which I would appreciate people would click on and complete, which sort of to evaluate the program. We'd like to know how we're doing, and it's one of the requirements for our grant. And as I said, thank you again, and I wish everyone a good evening.
Thank you all so much, and I appreciate all the kind words in the chats there. This has really been fun, and the last, I could talk about that for hours, and this is really an exciting. Hope to come back and do this again. Hope you guys have a great evening. It's been a pleasure sharing this time with you, and please check out the Okiteo website. You can see more of me there. That's my home right there. So always we have so many amazing artists and folks doing stuff there, and yeah. So goodbye, Mitch. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
You all.